welcome back, folks. You are listening to the Dr. Louis Sandoval Show. Today we are talking about stigma, and obviously when we say the word stigma, we think about our mental health and how we view people. Sometimes people who suffer from mental health might feel discriminated against, or like they are not allowed to just speak on it or share what's going on in their lives, because ultimately society doesn't really accept the fact that there's mental health, or doesn't like to deal with mental health, or we know it's there, but it's somebody else's problem, and God forbid it be associated with us. That's the idea behind stigma. That's the word of stigma. Stigma means that it's taboo. It's something we don't talk about. It's something that might be there, but we don't want to offend somebody or bring it up because it's just not a pleasant topic. Well, it's an interesting phenomenon, though, because if it's there, and we're talking about today in particular, these articles that came out about mental health in the workplace from the World Health Organization, the UN put out an article, and how we really want to focus on that now, how that's important, because now we're looking, by bringing out these articles, what it tells me is we're finally looking at the person, right? We're looking at the person beyond mental health. We're saying, look, mental health exists. We have to deal with this. It's not fun to talk about, but it's something that we can improve. And it's something that if somebody suffers from mental health, we can help them out with. But listen to what the article says. The objective here, when we're talking about decreasing stigma and improving things in the workplace, is to support the prevention of mental health risks, protect and promote mental health at work, and support those with mental health conditions so they can participate and thrive at work. Now, these sound very positive things. I think it's great. I think I would agree with that 100%. We do need to promote this. But like I was saying before the break, how much of this do we actually translate into our spiritual lives and the spiritual world? What would that sound like? Well, if this says that our objective is to support the prevention of mental health risks, why wouldn't we say our objective as Christians is to support the prevention of sin, the prevention of falling away from God? So what we're really going to do is not only support the prevention of falling away from God, but to promote, right? The next part is to protect and promote getting closer to God, protect and promote grace, protect and promote sanctifying grace among us, protect and promote sacrifice for God, protect and promote our spirituality. Why don't we say that as well, right? Because this is the important part. This is the part that we need to think about as Christians, as Catholics. And this sentence goes on to say, and support those with mental health conditions so they can participate and thrive at work. What would that sound like in the spiritual world? I would say, and support those suffering from addictions, from habitual sin, from immorality. Support them. Now, is that possible? Here's the question, because there's that stigma. If somebody comes out and says, gosh, let's say you're talking to a guy, I'm just going to say because it's generally guys, and say, yeah, gosh, I tend to go to really bad places. I go to clubs where there's women there of ill repute, and I go there and I try to either engage in intimacy, or I see them, remove their clothing, whatever it is. If somebody tells you that, and you know that this is a condition of the soul, a spiritual condition, what do? We normally go away from that. Do we ever stop and say, gosh, it sounds like you're going through something. Do I look beyond the sin and look at the person and say, you're going through something there, and how can we help you to improve your spiritual life, to get away from that? Is that possible? What can we do to support you so that when you are feeling that way, you're able to diverge your thoughts. You're able to change your habits. You're able to change those desires or fight those desires. It sounds to me the same way as when we're talking about anxiety, depression in the clinic, and we tell people, gosh, well, if you start feeling depressed, what can you do? You can go talk to somebody about that. You can call, make sure you take your medication, make sure you're doing these things. But notice that when we talk about depression or anxiety that way in the clinic, we have to name it. We have to come up to the person and say, or the person comes to us in clinic, I should say, and then they tell us, look, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm experiencing. And then we have to name the condition. I got to say, you're either suffering from depression or anxiety or psychosis. Now we know what we're dealing with, but let's support each other. As a therapist, as a psychiatrist, I don't tell people, oh my goodness, you're suffering from that. You might go elsewhere. No, there's nowhere else to go. I think it's the same thing in our spiritual life. This is why confession, there is actually a very smart psychological component to confession, where we actually have to go and name our sins, right? We name our sins. And when we talk to the priest, hopefully the priest acting as our spiritual doctor can say, well, what's going on in your life? What's happening? Okay, so you feel like you need to go and watch pornography all the time, or you want to go do drugs all the time. We need to get beyond that. We need to see what's deeper. And we need to not stigmatize that. If we know somebody's suffering from that, we look at it that way, because society is going to tell you,
hey, that's perfectly normal. It's all good. You do you do what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. You're celebrating the human body, whatever it is. You want to go do some drugs and it feels good.
We're in a feel-good society. If it feels good, go ahead. In the spiritual world, we say, hang on a second, just because it feels good doesn't mean it's good for you. You can eat a whole cake by yourself and that might taste really good, but boy, that's not going to be good for you. But do we have that support for each other? Do we have that support where we say, hey, you're going through something, it sounds like you're going through a heavy phase where you feel like you're sinning a lot, and these might be some heavy sins or light sins. There's no such thing as a light sin, technically speaking. Yes, we have venial sins and mortal sins. Absolutely. No question about that. But the level of suffering somebody's going through, somebody could be suffering a lot just from committing venial sins because they recognize how much that's keeping them from God. But where is our support? Is there so much stigma to sin that we aren't willing to lend a supporting hand, that we aren't willing to be there for the person? Or are we quick to condemn everybody without even looking at ourselves, without recognizing, hey, I'm a sinner too? This is the moment where you go to confession and all of a sudden we don't feel too good if a priest starts yelling at us or chastising us or anything along those lines, because at the end of the day, that moment of confession is really one penitent to another. Hey, Father, you've got this power that God gave you to forgive my sins. But the reality is we're both sinners sitting here, right? Can we support each other in that? Can we put our focus not on condemning the sinner, right? What do we say? We say, hate the sin, love the sinner. But a lot of times we're into the hate the sinner too. Can we get beyond that? Because this is where the spiritual health comes in. I equate this to the mental health. The stigma comes from putting a label on a person and saying, boy, they are depression or they are anxiety. They personify this bad thing. In the same way, I think in our spiritual world, we think of people as personifying sin. That guy, gosh, that guy's always watching pornography. He is just bad. He is this sin. Or that woman, she's always gossiping. She is a gossip. Don't we say that all the time? Right? She is this, she is that, he is this, he is that. I think we need to get beyond that. We need to be able to see the person, and then we're going to see the positivity. We're going to see, gosh, this is a child of God and they're going through something. I'm going to pray for them. Is that possible? This is a person who's going through some mental illness. I'm going to see if there's anything I can do to support them and to help them. I can't fix it. I can't get in there and say, boy, I'm going to fix this for you. Even as a doctor, I can't fix it. You're going to say, Dr. Sandoval, I'm going to come to you so that you can fix my problems. And I say, I can't fix your problems. I can give you professional advice. I might be able to prescribe you medication depending on if you need it or not. I can recommend you go to therapy. But ultimately, the person, it's up to them to do the legwork. And that might sound like, that sounds pretty cruel. It doesn't sound very supportive. What do you mean it's up to them? Why? What's the purpose of coming to you? The only reason you're coming to me is for professional advice and guidance, but I can't do much more for you than that. This is true of sin. If I can see somebody, if I meet somebody who is falling into habitual sin, is not forgiving other people, that's a big sin. We turn into that society that says, oh, don't worry, that can be really hard, you'll work on it, versus saying, hey, we need to work on this right now. You need to be able to let that go because you're really hurting yourself and you could be hurting those around you. Believe it or not, that's how it works. It's the same with the mental health. I think we need to take this approach with mental health, absolutely, because we need to build a culture. Actually, there's a sentence here that talks about that in the article. It says, we need to invest to build a culture of prevention around mental health at work, reshape the work environment to stop stigma and social exclusion, and ensure employees with mental health conditions feel protected and supported. Do we do that for anybody who's in a spiritual crisis as well? Do we say, hey, we need to build a culture of prevention around sin at work and at home and everywhere we are? Reshape the spiritual environment to stop stigma and spiritual exclusion. And what I call spiritual exclusion is when we say, boy, that person's, they're a bad sinner. I don't know about that. I better get away from them. And ensure that our fellow Christians, our fellow Catholics, our fellow human beings with we can say this as mental health conditions, we could say sin conditions feel protected and supported. It's not in our human nature to do that. Our human nature is broken right now. Our human nature, how do I know it's not in our human nature to do that? Because we see this time and again in the Bible. The image that comes to mind right now is what? When they brought the woman who was found in adultery, and they brought her before Christ. And what do they want to do to her? They wanted to stone her. And they said, Lord, or they said, Jesus, they talked to him and they said, Teacher, she was found in adultery. The law says we need to stone her, and we want to do this. We want to do this right now. We want to see blood. We think about that, right? When it comes to sin, we think about that when it comes to mental illness. This is the stigma. This person's got a problem. We don't want to be around him. We want to see this person get their just desserts, whatever it is. They're psychotic. They're on the streets. They're hearing voices. They need to get into a jail or a hospital or something. We want to see this is a problem that we don't want for ourselves. Same way this woman was caught in adultery. This is a problem. We need to get the law in here, and we need to take care of it. And what did Christ say? At that moment, I think what's going to be most important is to be able to say, hey, I got to take a look at myself, because the first thing Christ said, he didn't say they were wrong. He didn't say, no, the law doesn't say that. He didn't say she doesn't deserve to be stoned. He probably said, look, yeah, you probably could stone her right now. But he said, all right, fair enough. That's what the law says. But now I want you to look in your hearts, and I want you to look at yourself and say, hey, the first one among you who has no sin, throw the first stone. Whoever among you hasn't sinned, because it's easy for us to forget. It's easy to look out and say, yeah, look at that person, label that person, stigmatize that person, so we don't have to look at ourselves.